sir?
I'm doing wonderful. I'm so happy to be doing another L3 podcast recording. You know, our L3 community is growing, and it's exciting to see people talk about it, talk about us, talking about the content that we have. And it's one of those beautiful things that you dream about and you hope about, and it just kind of takes shape. And I think we'll talk about that a little bit later. You have a wonderful quote that I want the people to hear and to understand in depth. But I don't want to ruin it. I don't want to spoil it. I'm going to let you take over that because it's wonderful.
Oh, okay. So we are going to transition out of the last two podcasts. So last one we had the
one before last.
The one before last we had intentionality.
Yes.
So what does it mean to be intentional when you're making change in your life? And then the next one, the last one that we did, episode 4, was about the inner circle.
Yes.
Right. So we are actually going to kind of do two things. We're going to transition out of those.
Right.
And we are going to also bring in the growth aspect. So how do we grow, dare I say, intentionally?
Intentionally.
Right.
No pun intended.
Right.
Yeah. We're talking about growing our inner circle. We're talking about growing as individuals. How do we grow? How do we help others grow? And I think that's really good. And the way that we're going to transition out of that today is with a slight video, audio. We'll fit it in there somehow. But Jim actually wrote something and delivered it. And we actually have that. But Jim, I want you to set that up for the people before we show it to them, before we let them hear it. Tell us a little bit about that.
Right. So recently I wrote a speech and delivered the speech on the inner circle, and I used the analogy of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table in this. And so we talked about how King Arthur had to be very intentional, very specific about who he put into his inner circle, into this knight, who to bring into the Knights of the Round Table, because they weren't just any knights; they were the knights, the most trusted, the most valiant, if you will, group of guys. And
legendary.
So, yes,
historic.
Legendary. Yes.
The story of champions.
Yes. Did they ever find the Round Table? Do you know?
I don't know. I think it's been recreated several times. I think that would be an invaluable piece of history. No monetary assessment to it. That's something that a collector is going to acquire and keep forever.
Right.
Yes.
Of course, if you watch some movies, the Round Table was actually alien. But that's a different story.
What movie was it?
It's at Transformers, actually.
Really?
It was Transformers.
Oh, that's right, it was.
Yeah, in the end. So, just to look back at this speech, and I'll let you guys hear it and or see it, depending on how you're viewing this or listening to this podcast right now. But the speech, it gives you an idea of why you need to change your inner circle, why you need to build your inner circle to begin with. It gives you an idea of how to do that. So I ask a series of questions of what kind of questions do you ask to find out the right people, if the people are right for your inner circle. And then I get into some of the pitfalls and some of the hard parts. So they're, finding people for your inner circle is really not that big a deal, but you got to make sure that the people that you imitate, which is the people that you spend the most time with. We talked about that last time. The people you spend the most time with are the people that you're like. And so sometimes you have to, dare I say, remove some of those people from your life or from your circle, push them out a little bit.
That's a whole different podcast. That's a whole different topic. Because before actually doing this, before recording this, we sit down and we talk about what we want it to look like, topics that we want to discuss, how we want it to flow. And we kind of got stuck on this removing and is the inner circle locked and is it a revolving door, which we both agreed should not be.
Right.
But I think when we're being intentional about choosing who is in the inner circle, how do we remove them? How do we keep them at the value that they bring? How do they help us grow? How do we help them grow? It's very important to have people in there that need to be in there, but we don't want to talk about that right now.
Yes.
It's an entirely different topic. Slight segue before we transition into your speech, video, audio, however we're going to do that. Shout out to Vintage Coffee.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I was remiss in saying that we are out of studio today.
We're out of studio today.
And you can see by the different colored walls behind us that you're not used to seeing.
And the Christmas tree.
And a Christmas tree.
Yes.
We are on location, dare we say, at the Vintage Coffee here in Oklahoma City off of Western.
And I think that's a great spot to be. You know, we're local, we're here a lot, we brainstorm here a lot, we meet. So it's only fitting that we record a podcast here as well. And I brought that up specifically, one, to show them some love. Two, you're going to hear some things in the background today, people talking, some music, some espresso machines, some cash registers.
Blenders, yep.
Yeah. Just ignore that and focus on us, or come down to Vintage Coffee, and maybe one day we'll invite people to do a live broadcast with us.
Absolutely.
I think
Yeah, we'll do a Facebook Live on that. We'll probably do maybe even a YouTube Live once we get. You know, that would be a lot of fun.
That would be fun.
We need to do that soon. I like that idea a lot.
I agree. So we're going to take a slight break. We're going to let Jim's audio video play, talking about the roundtable, Knight's leadership. It's really good. I think it's about 5 to 7 minutes.
Yes, it was 7 minutes and 20 seconds, I think, was the official timer's report on that. Yep. So
pull your pen and paper out and take some notes, and we'll be right back.
All right. Here we go.
Circle. Just saying that out loud makes me think of a small group of knights in King Arthur's court. You can envision them, and you know who they are, the Knights of the Round Table. This is a highly skilled, highly trained, loyal, and intensely trustworthy group of men that were handpicked by the knight to lead King Arthur's army. But while I think of castles, moats, fierce battles, and pretty queens, the inner circle, the definition of the inner circle is really not too far off. Even though it may not contain swords and shining armor, the circle contains highly skilled and highly trusted people. For this speech, I will help you dig into your inner circle, what it actually means, and who you should have in yours. In his book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership, John Maxwell says, nobody does anything great alone. Leaders do not succeed alone. A leader's potential is determined by those closest to him. What makes the difference is the leader's inner circle. So your success, based on that, depends largely on who you allow to influence you. Now, I'm sure you've all heard it said that you are the sum of the 5 people you spend the most time with. For some people, this is not a shock. For some, it may be a little surprising. For others, this may be a really scary prospect. Usually, if you're wondering why something went the way it did, whether it was positive or negative, you don't need to look much further than the people that are directly around you. Think about this. If you were to imitate these people, would that help you to get ahead? If you think about it, you do imitate these people. You go out with your friends, you all say the same things. You all do the same things. At work, the people you're around, you say the same things. You do the same things. You go hang out in the same places. You go together for lunch. The key here is to make sure that the people that you imitate truly represent who you want to represent. The people that you have in your circle should challenge you at every step. Another important fact is not to be the smartest person in your circle. If you are the smartest person in the circle, your growth will stagnate. You want people to challenge you at every step of your journey. So, here's a couple of questions to ask yourself while you are determining who goes into your circle. Does this person have influence with others? Influential people can help you get places. Influential people can help you learn. You can learn how to have influence, which, by the way, is one of the key components of leadership. The next thing to ask is, does this person bring a complimentary gift to the table? I'm not talking about those after-dinner mints you get with your bill. I'm talking about a skill. If you bring somebody into your inner circle that has the same or similar skill to you, it's probably not going to benefit you as much as you would like. Bring in somebody who complements your skill so that you can learn from them. Perhaps they can learn from you, and your circle gets more influential. Does this person hold a strategic position in an organization? You've all been there. You want a new job. You want to do something a little bit different. So what do? You reach out to your network. Who do I know who works in this position? Who do I know that works for this company? Who do I know that can help me to accomplish whatever it is I want to accomplish? The next question to ask is, do they add value to myself or to you or to the organization? Let's be honest. If they don't add a whole lot of value, regardless of what that value is, they probably really don't belong in your circle. The last question I would ask is, do they positively impact other circle members? A minute ago, we mentioned how if I can learn from them, maybe they can learn from me. Or maybe we can all learn from each other. We bring in people to really learn from each other and to build ourselves up. And we can take our circle from this level to this level here. And then your leadership and your career sets off in a whole new direction. It's not that easy, though, when you think about it. Sure, defining who you want in your circle can be easy. You look around you and you see people all day long. It's like, I would like to be more like that person. I would like to learn how to do that, which this person can do. As long as you're looking, you will find people. They'll pop up all over the place. Of course, you need to have those conversations to get them into your circle, but chances are that is going to be an organic thing anyway. The hard part, however, is when you really take a look at the people in your life that don't add value. Or worse, do they devalue your life or your leadership? I had a talk with a friend of mine I worked with one time about another employee that we worked with. And I said, I really like Mike, but I just can't help but wondering, am I committing career suicide by spending time with him and working with him? And the person I talked to said, well, you were actually right on. And said, you're thinking very clearly, and that's something you need to take a look at. And so for me, even though I like Mike as a friend, I kept him a little bit at arm's length. He was no longer in my inner circle. He was in one of my outer circles. And sometimes you have to do that in order to get ahead. And I stopped allowing him to influence me. So in conclusion, I will tell you that defining your inner circle is one of the most important things that you will do for yourself, for your career, and for your leadership. It's important to be selective. It is important to choose wisely and to never stop making your circle better. As a leader, you can only do so much. King Arthur chose his knights very carefully. He chose knights that were strong leaders and that would complement each other. Who are your knights? Choose carefully. Thank you very much.
All right, Derrick. So that was the speech. I hope everybody enjoyed it. It was a little rough around the edges. I didn't have a chance to probably memorize it as much as I wanted to before delivering the speech.
Yeah.
So I had to use my notes quite a bit. But you kind of get the general idea of what it was, what it takes to build your inner circle.
I once heard one of my mentors say, if you wait to deliver the perfect speech, you'll never deliver it.
You'll never deliver it. That's right.
I think as communicators, as presenters, as facilitators, we always go back and forth between adding and taking out and saying this better and is this clear? Did it come across the way that I wanted to come across? And I think we'll talk about blind spots here in a little bit. But I think it's really good that you have something that you're passionate about, that you put it together, you manuscript it, you deliver it, you practice it. And I think that'll be something that you'll grow. I know we talked about this off camera as well, but that'll be a speech that goes from 7 minutes and 20 seconds to 30 minutes.
Right.
Because the more you think about it, the more you add, the more you grow. Some of those questions in there, we'll talk about some of those questions today. which are really important to growth and being intentional about the people that you allow in your inner circle. So I think that's really good. So help us transition out out of your speech and into this concept of growth.
Into the concept of growth. So you want to, one of the things you should always be doing as a leader, or and we use the term leader very broadly. So to me, and I think to you, we've talked about this a lot, and we'll get into this a lot, is leader is no longer about positional power.
I agree.
Right? Leadership is about having influence or serving, right? To lead is to serve. To be a leader is to build relationships with those around you and to positively impact their lives and let them positively impact yours.
Right.
And so looking at growth, we think about the intentionality of who you bring into your inner circle and what is it you need to do. So you start with taking an inventory as to where you are today. What are your goals?
Right.
And your short-term goals, 3 months, 6 months, a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years down the road, or even further. And you have to kind of create a roadmap as to how do you get there.
Right.
So you do your goals, and then you take a self-inventory.
Yes.
So you inventory yourself and you say, okay, well, I have these goals. This is what I'm capable of today. This is who I hang out with today. This is who I have in my network today. And you write those down.
Right.
Yeah, you write those down and you think about the positive aspects and don't forget the negatives, because you have to work on the negatives. If you have bad habits, or if you are doing things, like people are on their phones all the time, just mindless, liking posts or, putting angry face emojis on, some political post somewhere.
Right.
That's a bad habit. And I will admit that I fall into that trap sometimes as well as everybody else does. So you have to think about the bad habits as well. What can you purge out of that? And so you take this inventory, you put in the good, you take in the bad, and you figure out what is the gap between that inventory and your goal. Right. So it's important to know what you need to change or what you need to add to meet those goals.
And so you said a lot there, and I think you hit on three major points that we're going to try to dissect here for a little bit. So when we think about the self-inventory, you said goals, which I think is really good.
Right.
You talked about gaps, which I think is really good, and you talked about growth. And I think in order for us to grow, we have to know what our goals are. We have to know where those gaps are. But for the goals, I think we have professional goals. We have social goals. We have, we break them down. And while we're assessing those goals, where we want to be, the gap is where we are and what's the difference between where we are and where we want to be. That's the gap. Right. And so when we think about this gap, and I'm putting you on the spot here for a little bit.
Okay.
When we think about this professional gap, in that gap are going to be some good things and some bad things. You talked about that as well.
Yes.
How do we identify what those good things and bad things are? Because, I can look at myself all day, and I think my perspective of who I am is going to be a little skewed. Because I'm inside. I'm looking at me from the inside, right? How do I cover my blind spots, right? How do I cover the blind spots in that gap?
So this gets into a kind of another podcast in and of itself.
Yeah.
And actually, it's kind of a segue into how leadership coaches, which is where this podcast is housed, is actually how that's going to morph. Okay, so that's a big subject, but we'll talk about it for just a second.
Yeah.
So honestly, you ask somebody to give you an inventory. You ask them some questions, say, what do you think about me? What do you think about my leadership? What do I do good? What do I do bad?
Right.
In the business world, we call that 360. Right. So the 360 review is not only do you have, not as a positional leader, as a manager, you will review your people, but you also have your people review you.
That's awesome.
And that is a really big key, and something that no leader who is even remotely confident should have a problem with.
Right.
Because the purpose of this is we want to grow.
Right.
And if we don't get an objective look into that, which goes outside of our own brains, you're absolutely right. That is a blind spot.
It is.
If we don't get into that, then we miss out on a huge opportunity for real growth, not just little growth. We're talking real growth.
Right, significant growth, substantial growth. And so I want to jump back to the launching pad from which we started this conversation was the round table, the Knights of King Arthur's.
Yes, King
Round
Arthur's
Table.
Court.
Yeah, and so and I love our conversations. Maybe we should start capturing our conversations off camera, like before, like part of the brainstorming process,
Yep.
because I think that's where some
Ooh,
of
a
the
behind the scenes.
Ooh, that's nice. I like that. That's where some of like the meat. That's where the juice comes from when we get on camera. You know, we're trying to make sure that we're talking effectively to you all, that we're not stumbling over our words.
Right.
We're growing as communicators every single day. We're trying to. We're reading books, we're writing, we're researching, we're listening to other people's podcasts. So we want to present a polished presentation when we come and spend time with you guys. But
Right.
I think there's value to what we talk about behind scene as well. And one of the things that you mentioned as we're paralleling, as we're correlating what we're talking about, the content, to the round table. And I can't help but notice the coincidence, the comparison, if you're talking about this 360 review and this round table concept, right?
You're so good at that.
Oh my gosh.
You are so good at that.
And so you look at King Arthur, and I want you to kind of flesh this out a little bit, because we talked about this. You talked about King Arthur being intentional about who he invited to his table.
Right.
And he knew what his blind spots were, and it happened through relationship. Walk us through that. King Arthur trying to develop the Knights of this round table, this
Right.
360 review of himself, doing this self-evaluation, trying to grow a kingdom, grow a people,
Right.
trying to grow as a leader, knowing he couldn't do it by himself, and that he needed these other people around him, right? This inner circle. It kind of walk us through that just for a little
Right.
bit, right?
So King Arthur, he, when he started, putting together the Round Table and the Knights of the Round Table, he knows, like you said, where his gaps are. He can't fight a war on his own.
Right.
He cannot defend his castle. He cannot defend Camelot on his own.
Right.
And he knew that he needed a group of people who were trustworthy,
Right.
who were loyal.
Yeah.
I think I use the term fiercely loyal in my speech, but he needed to evaluate each person and compare that person to his own skills.
Yeah.
Okay, so
my
you are
gosh.
really good at, sword fighting, and so I need you to help, develop the soldiers for fighting with the sword. You are really good at equestrian. You're really good with the horses.
Right.
We need people to teach the soldiers how to ride and how to fight while riding.
Right.
We need a strategist
Right.
to help us to develop our war plan or our defense plan or whatnot. And so as he was evaluating people, he would pull in these men and he would knight them and then train them and allow them to train each other.
Wow.
And, you hear as iron sharpens iron, right? One man sharpens another. Well, this is exactly what we're after.
Right.
Right. As we develop our inner circle and as King Arthur developed his round table and filled all the spots in his round table to do that. And so you have to be very intentional with making sure you you bring in skills that are complementary to yours.
That's wonderful.
It's complementary.
And so, and if I heard you correctly, we're talking about, because we want to make sure we draw these lines, we want to connect the lines between these dots, because you're dropping a lot of nuggets here. And you can correct me if I misheard you. And you guys feel free to chime in too on social media. Let us know some good stuff that you've heard, maybe some areas where we could have been a little bit clearer. We want to grow. We want to make this immediately applicable to you and to your work environment. And so if I heard you correctly, you're saying that he was a leader, and he had a goal, and he looked at where he was and where he wanted to be, and he saw a gap,
yes.
and he filled those gaps in his inner circle with people who had the skill set to help him get where he wanted to be.
Absolutely.
And so when we think about us as individuals, us trying to grow within an organization, if it's from our family to our friends to our community to our professional setting, we have to be realistic, and we need people to help us identify where we are. We need to be honest with where we are. with our skill set, with our speaking, with our people skills, with our relationship development, with our money. We need people around us to help us be honest with where we are. And then when we're setting goals to where we want to be, that has to also be an honest evaluation. And then we look at the gap and we say, this is what we need in order to get from here to there. Did I hear that correctly?
You heard it absolutely. Yes.
I think that's wonderful. And one of the things that you said that I thought was very important is not only do you need to know who you are, you need to know the other people as well.
Absolutely.
So you need to be able to evaluate their skill set correctly as well. I think sometimes people, in order to get a position, may misrepresent themselves in order to get there. Right. And I don't want to do that. I don't want to fake it till I make it.
Right.
Right. I want to make sure that I'm developing myself along the correct path, so that when I get there, I'm exactly who I wanted to be and I'm exactly where I wanted to be. And so I want to, you said something else that I think was very valuable. Jim, he has this perspective, which I think is very good for us, that we complement each other. I'll say something and then that will spur a thought in him and he'll be like, you know what? That reminds me of, or that also means,
right.
And we get on this thing where we're building this great conversation. In your speech, you had this line that talked about just working hard, and eventually you'll look up and the people that you need will find you. Do we have that on hand? Do you have that speech on hand? And I know that's something that I think we shouldn't downplay that sentence. And so read that for us real quick.
Right. So the sentence says, if you are, well, let me pull it up so I can get it absolutely right. So as long as you are working towards getting better all the time, the right people will appear.
As long as you are working to get better all the time, the right people will appear.
Right. And so as you're developing your inner circle,
right,
you're trying to make yourself better, you will look up and find that sometimes these people have been around all along.
Yes.
As you start to look at your inventory, you start to look at their inventory, you look at people objective. It's not just somebody I work with now. It's somebody who I look up to, or somebody that I, serve at church with, or, somebody that my wife knows.
Right.
You will find that those people will complement your skills with their own really good set of skills. And as long as you're growing, you will see these people all the time.
Yeah.
You will start looking. It's kind of like an entrepreneur looks at everything as a business idea.
That's
right?
true.
As somebody who is leading and is trying to be a better leader, is constantly growing, you will look at people more objectively.
Right.
Not to say that, okay, well, I can't be with that guy, his hair's too long. You will look past the petty stuff. Right. You will look past the petty stuff and you will evaluate personalities.
I agree.
And you will determine whether or not that person belongs in your network.
Yeah. And so speaking of network, that's a wonderful transition. We know that when we're networking, we're talking about being intentional about the people that we meet. We're talking about being intentional of developing our circle, our inner circle, our outer circle, putting people there, inviting them in on purpose, right? Knowing that they provide a skill set, that they add value. Once again, this goes across every area of life. Now, we're not just talking about a profession or working within an organization. We want to make sure that we surround ourselves with people in every area of our life that are adding value. Adding value is going to be a totally different one. We've already talked about that. That's a different episode. But network is a word that you use. And so I wrote down some things when I thought about network. And I'm going to say them and I want to see your reaction, right?
Okay.
So when we think about our network, we've already talked about our network helps us grow. Our network helps us fill our gaps.
Fill the gaps.
Our network helps to identify our blind spots, right? But I have some other things that I think a network provides, and feel free to chime in on this.
Okay.
I think our network expands our reach.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. You think about what, if you just get into pure network, you look at LinkedIn, for example, LinkedIn.com, it says, well, you have the ability to, when you post something on LinkedIn, it'll say you have the ability to reach 13,000 people based off of the 400 or 500 people that you may have,
right?
Or even less, in your direct network. So people that that you have met, that you have identified as potentially as somebody who can help you grow, but those people have people that they know.
Exactly.
And that number just gets exponentially.
Exactly.
It gets exponential. So you got your 200, you've got their 200, you've got their 200, and it's a big triangle. It just gets bigger and bigger and bigger.
Right. I love that. I was thinking. That's exactly what I was thinking. All right. Here's the second one. Networking expands our influence,
Networking, yes, yeah, absolutely.
or maybe our ability to influence.
Right. So it kind of goes along the same lines,
Uh-huh.
right? So now you have, people that you're looking at that you can reach out to or have somebody else reach out to when you have something that you want to do, and you want to influence others for that.
Right.
Those people will help you do that.
Yeah.
And so your influence, then if you influence one guy, he influences two others, so for every two they have two. It's the same aspect, in my opinion.
I think that's great. The third thing I think about, and this is along the same lines, networking increases our access.
Yes.
Like I love when you think about what happens when you know a bunch of people, or you know people who know people. It just increases everything. It's no longer me doing it by myself. I now have allies. I now have cohorts. I now have fans, people who love what I do, and they are working on my behalf to push me forward. It just increases everything. The last one I thought about was it increases the amount of information that I have access to as well.
Increases the amount of information. So again, it's when you expand your network, and your network gets very large, your second, third, fourth levels, that information, there's just a ton of information out there. It is a 7 degrees to Kevin Bacon kind of thing, right? So that information, everybody has something to offer.
Yes.
And the more you pay attention to what your group pays attention to,
Right.
That information does expand. Again, back to LinkedIn, you will see somebody in your group that liked somebody else's post.
Right.
Or that they commented on somebody else, or they shared something. And so if you allow yourself to learn and to pay attention to the influx of information, and it is a fire hose of information all the time, you absolutely see that does grow exponentially.
And so when I think about the growth opportunities of relationship, that the growth opportunities that relationship provide, I think of when I meet a person of influence, what do I get with that relationship? Now, we'll talk about giving later because we're actually coming up against the wall in the time for this episode, but we'll talk about how do we add value, how do we give, how do we add to someone's circle. Right now we're talking about us, right, but we're going to talk about how we contribute as well, because I believe leaders are givers as well.
Yes. And
so, but when I think about a person that I want to be in a relationship with, I think about these 4 or 5 things, right? I think about what is their reach like? Who do they know? How does knowing them expand my reach? How does knowing them expand my ability to influence? Knowing them, how does that increase my access to different places? And then how does it increase the amount of information that I now get? Because now I'm not getting it from just one avenue. I'm getting it from 50. I'm getting it from 100. Right? It's like this feedback. This is why I love social media so much. I can put something out there through one avenue, and it reaches all these different people, right? And I get all this access from it. It's almost like if we had to individually place this podcast in people's hands, it'd be so much harder than for us to build a relationship and put it in one place, and all those people have access to it. Right. So just to wrap it up real quick, and then I'm going to give you the final word. When I think about being intentional about creating, growing, solidifying our inner circle, right? When we think about that, I don't think we can have those conversations without talking about being a leader. Right. Which comes back to what we do. We're talking about learning, we're talking about loving, we're talking about leading. I think leaders are very intentional about growing their circle. And today we chose to talk about growth. What are those things that we're talking about for growth? We're talking about how do we grow our network? Why is growing our network important? Well, when we grow our network, we allow ourselves to take this evaluation, the self-evaluation, compare it with others, their assessment of us. Right. We get to set these goals of where we are, where we want to be. We have have that network, that inner circle that helps us fill those gaps, right? And when we make those relationships, when we build our network, they help us to acquire information and access. They expand our reach, growing our circle, not only in numbers, but in depth. I think is a very important component to being a successful and effective leader.
It absolutely is. And so leaders are always growing. You know, that's one of the key components of a leader,
Right.
is that the growth never stops.
Right.
And so to continue growing, you have to really just expand your reach beyond what you yourself can do. Like I said in the speech, you know, we quoted Maxwell, you know, leaders do not succeed alone. You know, people cannot do big things on their own. They have to have a team to do that with.
Right.
You know, if you think about in family, you know, it takes a village to raise a family, right? That
gosh.
same sort of mentality. It's better as a team.
Right.
Right. It's just better as a team anyway. But yes, absolutely. You know, that's part of leadership, is you're always growing. You're always making a difference.
Yes, sir.
And you're always allowing people to influence you as well.
I would dare to say that King Arthur wouldn't be nearly as great without the Knights Table.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah, those people help propel him forward. They
Right.
filled in his gaps. They helped him accomplish his goals. I think that whole entire analogy that you use is great when we're talking about this inner circle, this intentionality, and growing as leaders.
Right.
Great episode, Jim.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. All right, everybody. I thank you very much for tuning in, and we will catch you next time on the L3 Podcast.
Holler.
You've been listening to the L3 Podcast with Jim and Derrick. Be sure to check out our other episodes on theleadershipcoaches.net/podcast.